Attention! It is time to change the channel. Live from Philadelphia, it's Mr. Pritchard's Art Room!
Mr. Pritchard, we are live.
What?
Live.
We're live? Now? Hey! Welcome back! Welcome to the show. Welcome to Mr. Pritchard's Art Room. What do we got going on today? Photography. I worked in photography for a while. It's an interesting art, capturing a moment of time. And I'm not talking about working in photography like using a phone. I had an old camera. What artists were you doing today? Not this Will Ferrell fake making fun of 70s and 80s photographs. We're not doing this, are we? What artists are we doing? James Van Der Zee. Good artist. Part of the Harlem Renaissance. Let's get into the history of James Van Der Zee and then get into the photography from James Van Der Zee. It's good stuff. Let's get started. Now, this is an interesting place to start with James Van Der Zee. This is an advertisement from 1910 from his sister's art school that she had in New York City, in Harlem. James Van Der Zee was not born in New York. Now, the story goes he won a camera, was taking pictures where he lived, moved to New York, and the studio was started at his sister's school. Later on, he got his own studio for photography. James Van Der Zee is part of the beginnings of photography. We're talking the first 50, 60 years. The photographs in the beginning are mostly black and white and in a studio. There are pictures also taken outside the studio. Now, it's said that James Van Der Zee captures the middle class. I feel that James Van Der Zee just captures life in the arts, life of families, and life of what's going on in the community. Let's start breaking down some of the studio art of James Van Der Zee. So let's start with the James Van Der Zee self-portrait. A lot of people call it a selfie now. Now, James Van Der Zee moves to Harlem, becomes part of the Harlem Renaissance art movement. First studio, as we said, was in his sister's school. His sister was also an artist and worked in silent films. Try to imagine a movie without any voices. The movies at that time, film would just have people acting. Then you might have a little screen that would have a typed out little saying of what the person was saying. Photography at this time was black and white. It's the start of photography. Now, people like to get photographs taken. The price was way different. Before this, if you wanted a picture of yourself, your family, you had to get a painting, and you might have to pose for weeks. Now, all of a sudden, you can get a photograph. It was cheaper, and you didn't have to pose as long. Families, entertainers, wedding couples. A lot of this is similar to what we do today. We still take pictures of entertainers, maybe at a celebration, a party, a wedding, a graduation, a prom. We have photographs of soldiers. We have photographs of families, religious individuals. I kind of like the musicians, and I also like the escape artist photograph. My favorite photograph in here is of a dancer. Beautiful photographs. Now, a person would go to a studio, and a lot of times the photographer would help you pose. They might have a painted background like James Van Der Zee has to give a different look to the background. Think of that almost like how we use green screens now to give a fake background to an image. Same idea with a painted background. Let's get into some of the different art that James Van Der Zee did outside of the studio. Here are some images outside of the studio. And James Van Der Zee is capturing life, what it was like to be in New York at this time. Here's it at a school. We have images from the community. Here's at a religious organization, documenting life from this time. I imagine some of the people were amazed to get themselves in an image at this time because it was so new. Here is a dinner party. And last but not least, here is a swim team. Amazing photographs. There's so many people in this photograph that had to hold still for this image. Let's get into the last aspect of James Van Der Zee, the idea of adding things to photographs to put them over the top creatively. Let's get into some more of the creative ideas in photography that James Van Der Zee used. We already went through painted backgrounds, yet how about hand coloring black and white images to add color to something that was black and white? Another idea is this double exposure photograph. The person above this family is not really there. They're at it, almost like taking tracing paper and making layers. This soldier, the writing next to the soldier, is not there. It is added. Not done on a computer. This bridal couple, the child below, is added, almost like the child's there showing, like dreaming of the child's future of being married. Person sitting here with the man above is not in this image. The double exposure gives this kind of ghostly feel. One of my favorite uses of the double exposure is this musician with all the instruments around. Double exposure is very interesting because you're using multiple images to put together and not using a computer at this time. One of the things I found in my research of James Van Der Zee is shortly after he passed away, there's a newspaper article stating that his artwork wasn't as popular in the art world because a lot of these techniques were thought of as old-fashioned even when James Van Der Zee was using them, which I find kind of strange. The painted background, I can kind of understand that they might think it's old-fashioned, that they prefer using a real background. However, the idea of double exposure and things, the artist Man Ray was using these same things. So it's kind of interesting how James Van Der Zee wasn't taken as serious in the world of art. Painted backgrounds, when I worked in photography, were still being used. So, what are your thoughts of the artist James Van Der Zee? Do you relate to the images? Do you see anyone in the images that remind you of yourself or a family member? Would you want to be a photographer? Let's get into our lesson a little bit on what we're going to do. So here's what we're going to be working on. We're going to become photographers for this project. It's going to be fun. Now we're going to cheat a little bit. If you don't have a camera, you can use your cell phone or the Chromebook. Now I know right now some students are going, Mr. Pritchard, this Chromebook is gigantic. Why would I want to use a Chromebook? It's kind of interesting because the old cameras were big too. So it gives that historical feel like James Van Der Zee, the gigantic cameras, not these little tiny cameras that we have nowadays or cell phones. So a couple things we're going to follow working on this project. First thing, we're going to take 3 images of people. Has to be a person we know in the community or a family member that we want to document for history. We want everyone to know about this person. Next rule, has to be black and white. We're not going to do color photography. A couple of reasons why. We want to give that feel to James Van Der Zee, historical black and white images. Also, I don't want all the bright colors of the world to get in the way of the subject. Imagine behind me there's a bright orange car, and it's just distracting. To have it black and white and to focus on the individual. Now, there's a couple things also I want you to pay attention to. If you're taking a picture of someone that you want to document, let's say you have a cousin into baseball, well, maybe have them wearing their baseball hat. Maybe a family member that likes to dance. Have the person wearing something from dance. Maybe you have a family member into puzzles. Well, maybe have the person next to a puzzle. So it's up to you if you want to pose them too, similar to a studio. Maybe you want to use a green screen to have a fake background, which is also interesting. I'll give you a couple other tips. Maybe you want to document the bus driver that picks you up every day with your family. Ask permission before you take a picture of someone, and maybe say to the bus driver, do you mind if I take an image of you? And that'd be a cool background because the person's holding the wheel and you're coming into the bus. And, always ask permission and make sure you know the person. We're not going up to random strangers. Now, there's a couple ways you can get around the 3 images of different people in the world that you know. One of them can be a self-portrait, so we have one image that can be a self-portrait or a selfie. That's a strange term. Another thing you can do is another image can be us copying a famous James Van Der Zee photograph. Got a couple examples here from an Instagram artist. Here's a copy of the James Van Der Zee self-portrait, and another one of Basquiat, another one of an advertisement. So that's another option you have. So if you decide, well, Mr. Pritchard, I didn't feel like taking 3 different photographs. I wanted to do a self-portrait. I wanted to do a copy. And then I did one of somebody else that I know in the family. It's an option. We don't want 3 self-portraits. Remember, James Van Der Zee is documenting life. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to document life in our community. Last thing you need to do. You're going to do a little write-up about each photograph. I'd say 2-3 sentences, paragraph. And that way we know who the person is in the subject matter. I'll give an example. I'll go back to the puzzle. Say it's a picture of your mom and she's into puzzles. So it's a picture and kind of posed and she's got the puzzle, smiling. Your writing might be, this is a photograph of my mother. She really loves making puzzles and I like doing this with her too. I love the quiet time with my mother making puzzles. And here's what we're going to do. You're going to turn in your 3 images on Google Classroom. We'll have a couple days where we project them. And you, as the artist, will go up and do your little ratings for each one so we know a little bit of the backstory. It's going to be pretty interesting, especially because they're all going to be in black and white. It's going to look like one big series of images going together. It's going to be pretty neat. Well, until next time, hope everybody's safe and well, and take care.